Hope everyone can hear me. As Pamela said, welcome to the session on data delving, engaging staff in student experience data. As been covered, my name is Nathaniel Pickering and I work as a senior lecturer in research and evaluation in a central directorate called Student Engagement, Evaluation and Research. The directorate plays a pivotal role in supporting and enhancing the student experience at Sheffield Hallam University. My interests particularly are in higher education policy, widening participation and the student experience. But much of my work involves supporting academic and professional services staff from across the institution in interpreting and actioning their student data for enhancement. Today's session I will focus on student experience data with a particular focus on the National Student Survey and how we've engaged staff in student experience surveys with the aim of building institutional understanding and enhancement. The beginning of the webinar will outline some of the context in which higher education providers are currently operating, and then I'll share two methods we've employed to empower staff so that they can take control of their own data and do their own delving into that. With me today is my colleague, Dr. Liz Austin, who will be responding to your comments throughout the webinar, so give us some really difficult questions. So first off, just to kind of reflect back a few years, in 2014, Sir Michael Barber even, wrote a foreword to a report where he predicted that big data will transform education just like it has other industries and will lead to evidence-based policy that will resolve long-standing problems. Since writing this foreword, Sir Barber has been appointed as the chair of the Office for Students, the new university regulatory body in England. It could be argued that big data has arrived in the sector, but its ability to resolve long-standing dilemmas is questionable, as the HE sector has long-standing problems that remain unresolved, even though there is substantial data and evidence about these issues, for example, the BME attainment gap. However, data alone cannot drive improvements. Data must be put in the hands of users who can wield it for accountability purposes, and this is where the real challenge lies for progress. Once data has been put in the hands of users, be that university staff, students or the public, they often do not know what to do with it or what questions to ask to maximize its impact and drive change. For many people, the data revolution has gone unnoticed. As someone that works in an English institution and has a keen interest in higher education policy, I've watched with interest the formation of the Office for Students. And although the Office for Students' regulatory powers are only applicable to English HE providers, I'd like to proposition that perhaps their influence may be felt much wider than that. The four measures I've just put up here are either already in existence or are currently being developed by the Office for Students, and they have direct control or oversight of these. And they're used to demonstrate quality and value for money of the sector. As we know, the National Student Survey already has a lot of influence over all the UK education sectors, and no doubt as the other measures develop, they will too. And so the impact of the Office for Students will be very wide. Also, there is a mountain of other areas where data is being collected by different groups, all of which the Office for Students directly participates in. And again, these may impact the policy education debate across the whole country and not just in England. So just thinking of all the changes that are happening at the moment and will probably happen in the next few years, how prepared is your institution for that growing data landscape? Just give you a moment to reflect on that. So, It's often unclear how institutions close the loop between data collection and effective action. Professor Lee Harvey suggests to gain support and trust in any student feedback system, the process must be transparent and be supported by senior management. It should also be adequately resourced and should be progressive and not recriminatory. I would suggest that some of the resources for these feedback processes should be dedicated to staff development and training in how to use data most effectively. The data landscape can be both confusing and easy to get lost in. In the next webinar in this series, Hunting for Evidence in the Data Landscape, will pick up some of these themes, I think, in more detail. For us, though, as people that work in higher education, we have to think about ways we can empower staff with a little bit of support to do their own data delving. From talking to people across the sector, it seems evident that providers have well-established but evolving reporting tools that are often well embedded within their own quality processes. Here are some examples of visualizations that we use at Hallam. In our National Student Survey report, we have 12 different tabs that enable you to cut and present the data in many different ways. For data experts and enthusiasts, this is an accessible, intuitive and exciting tool for them to use and delve into the student experience with. For data novices, reporting tools can be overwhelming, confusing and act as a barrier to enhancement. Academics also approach evaluation tools according to the constraints or enablers in their context, and this will be influenced by their approach to their own academic practice and what they view the purpose of higher education to be. In my experience, the discipline, a staff member's role and even their political leanings are just some of the things that affect how they engage with evaluation tools, such as module evaluation or the National Student Survey. Both our case studies that are drawn today are based around the National Student Survey. This is a highly contested evaluation tool, which can be problematic when you're trying to encourage people to use it in their practice. I've had staff tell me that it's not relevant to their discipline or their students, that it's used inappropriately both by management within their institution and also by outside of their institution in the wider sector, that it promotes consumerist models of education. Dr. Buckley, who is also running a webinar session in this series, highlights here some of the negative ways the NSS is used to hold departments to account, while Dr. Pamela Lenton challenges the use of the National Student Survey in university rankings. However, Professor Paul Ramsden, on two occasions in 2010 and 2017, has defended the use of the NSS and also about its reliability, and propositions that it's fit for purpose even though it's moved beyond its original design intentions. Understanding and the limitations and advantages of a tool such as the National Student Survey is crucial when engaging staff with this tool, as those limitations and advantages can cause challenges and opportunities for engagement. My colleagues Stella Jones-Devitt and Alan Donnelly recently delivered an excellent webinar around questioning our use of evidence and what evidence we use, and I'd encourage all of you to go back and reflect on some of the discussions they had in that webinar. So the challenges listed here are a mixture of those drawn from the literature and those from my own experience. All of these apply particularly to the NSS, and I've grouped them into three themes, but I think they kind of do merge somewhat. So first of all is the kind of methodological challenges of the survey itself. So reflecting on that last slide and some of the criticisms around the NSS, we often find this is a challenge because staff are just saying, I don't want to engage with that because I don't think it's very good. We also found that lots of staff, once the results were published, would then question the reliability of those results. And this really came down to what students they thought were included in the survey, and they often thought the sampling was incorrect. So over the last few years, we've really tried to clearly communicate this information around how the survey is run and implemented within our institution, and also how results are published both internally and externally to overcome some of these challenges. Institutional challenges, I think, are very interesting because often changes arising from large-scale surveys such as the National Student Survey are driven from the top of the organisation, with decisions for improvements being taken by senior managers. However, these changes are often disseminated through the organisation, whether that be the faculty, department or school, ineffectively, and staff often can't see the rationale from the survey tool to the outcome that they're implementing. Also, evaluation tools such as the NSS, staff may feel done to, and that then gives them little ownership or responsibility for the outcomes of the survey. However, this can be overcome when staff understand what is expected of them and are enabled to buy into the institutional approach, but staff have to know what this approach is. Responses from managers also can be reactionary and short-term, only looking at a year in isolation. A course leader once expressed their disappointment to me when they were questioned on why their course was below the institutional average. Without any acknowledgement of the significant improvements over the last 2 years they had made by increasing their overall satisfaction by 20%. Also, our focus is often on what went wrong rather than what we did well. Where is the opportunity to celebrate those courses that are making or maintaining good progress? Where and how do institutions share good practice? How do colleagues involved in good courses have the opportunity to communicate their practice to senior managers and across the institution? This will be picked up in the case study on appreciative inquiry that we cover in this webinar. And the staff challenges are definitely, these are things that I've come across in various guises and while my time at Sheffield Hallam. And these things, so I think, first of all, one of the challenges we have is that staff really don't know what we mean when we talk about surveys for enhancement, or how to use survey data for enhancement. And I think there's kind of an assumption that staff should know what that means. And also something very basic, it's just the IT experience and confidence of our staff and the role this plays in how they engage with the data. And I think often that's really missed off kind of how we engage staff with data. So there's a question here for you. What is the main challenges for you or your organisation when it comes to data delving? I think my chat box is going a little bit slow, so I'm not going to be able to respond to anyone. But that's something we might be able to pick that up at the end of the webinar. Okay. So as I mentioned, I work in the Central Directorate of Student Engagement, Evaluation and Research, or commonly referred to as STEER. The Directorate was formed about 3 years ago, or 3.5 years ago now, and over that time what we've tried to do is develop some kind of underlying principles to an approach that we take with staff when it comes to engaging them in student experience data and to encouraging them to delve into their data. And these principles are we've tried to really underpin them in everything that we do, and hopefully you'll see in the case studies as we go through some of these principles. I think really the one that the second two bullet points are really key for me. You know, that we should be supportive as staff, and that it should be positive and empowering, and also that we're not dictating to people how they need to enhance their courses, but actually it should be in a collaborative approach between us and other members of their team, and that it should be an ongoing process rather than a kind of stop-start process. So this moves us on to our first case study, and hopefully you'll see our evolving approach in this as I talk you through it. So we delivered an event based on the National Student Survey with a significant difference. This event was focused on what was working well and allowed staff from across the university to share what they were doing and what was working in their areas. At the time, this rarely happened within our institution. We were keen that the event should have tangible benefits for the staff involved, their students, and also for the wider institution. The event was aimed at course leaders, although we did have faculty and department managers also in attendance. The event was designed using an appreciative inquiry evaluation model. Appreciative inquiry has a positive core and focuses on what is working well. In its broadest focus, it involves a systematic discovery of what is effective on a number of different levels. It allows participants to co-create their reality, emphasizing what is working right in practice, and for them to collectively envision how they might take that forward and make it even better. This approach is completely removed from the deficit-focused problem-solving techniques that often result in conflict and negativity between teams or between staff and managers. And those initiatives, those kind of problem-solving techniques, often don't lead to established or sustained change in the long run. However, appreciative inquiry is not blindly optimistic, nor does it ignore concerns or difficulties. Instead, it provides a space for these to come to the surface in a positive and productive manner. And I really encourage you to look at the references at the end of the slide, and I've put some appreciative inquiry links in there for you to kind of go back and reflect on the process in a little bit more detail. So the appreciative inquiry has 5 stages in the model, and during the NSS event we took course leaders through each stage. While we'd asked staff to reflect on their data before the event, we did not actually present any NS data at the event itself, which might seem a little bit strange, but we often find that once you've presented data to people, that is all they focus on, and they want to explain that data. And it also means that they're not communicating with the people around them. Staff were placed in groups with people that they did not normally work with or even know. And again, this was crucial to kind of get them talking across departments and faculties and different courses together. Each group had a different facilitator for each stage of the process. The facilitators were there to prompt discussion and had a list of questions to ask if participants were struggling to make progress at the different stages. The first stage, which is at the top of the drawing, is define. This asks participants to define what is to be evaluated. It is crucial for participants to contribute to this stage, as it is both empowering and gives them a sense of control and ownership of the evaluation process. While each group was given an area of the NSS to focus on, it was up to them to define, as a group, what they would work on themselves. So although we said, could this group look at assessment and feedback, it was up to them to define what element of assessment and feedback they wanted to work on during that session. The second stage, discover, asked participants to talk about the best things about their practice or their course under evaluation. Staff initially really struggled to focus on the positive. This is why we had something called free parking. So free parking was there to enable people to raise issues, and we'd write it down under the free parking kind of heading so that we could return back to these issues. But once they'd been parked, it allowed staff to move on and really focus on that positive. And like I said, and it allowed us at later stages to come back to those issues that had been raised. The third stage, dream, asked participants to dream about their perfect scenario. For example, what would the perfect course look like in the perfect institution in a perfect world? We asked participants to think big. The fourth stage is about how participants were then to implement those dreams. The fifth stage, deliver, ask participants to make plans about how they would deliver their design. What resources would they need, and perhaps most importantly, how will they evaluate their design the changes they've made in their design going forward? Staff reported back that this was a very different and positive experience attending the workshop. One member of staff came to thank us after the session had ended because coming into the event they thought they were going to get reprimanded for their National Student Survey results. But they left feeling motivated and inspired to make changes, drawing upon the experiences and practice of other people that they'd worked with that day. We delivered a report of findings to senior managers within the university, but more importantly, we used the evidence and findings from the workshop to design a programme of staff development workshops called Interventions with Impact. You can find out more about these on our blog, which there is a link to at the end of the webinar. So the second case study really came about the work came about in response to changes within the institution itself. When our new Vice-Chancellor started, he reinforced the importance of course improvement plans and the role these plans had in informing department plans and faculty plans. These plans are written by course leaders and feed in, like I said, to department and faculty ones. As the priority of plans increased, and working in a central directorate, we were asked to come and support a number of staff or a number of areas of staff together to help them pull together their course improvement plans. And once the plans had been finished and submitted, we undertook a review of all of the plans and drawing together the evidence from supporting staff and from the reviews. We realised that there was a number of things, both positives and negatives, about the way people engaged in the process and their practice that was really helping them create excellent course improvement plans that would make a real difference to the student experience or hindering their progress. So, for example, things like staff's confidence, even their confidence in how to access the reports, made a real difference in the quality of the plans being submitted. We also noticed that the relationship to the data had an impact on the objectivity and clarity that staff had when it came to reflecting on their practice and reflecting on their course. So, for example, if you're a course leader and your course is not making the progress that you'd like, you might feel a little bit protective of that experience. We also realised that course improvement plans where the course leader had a much broader understanding of the student experience at the university. So not just in relation to their course, but in relation to their faculty and also in relation to the university. That their plans were really, the quality of those was much better because they understood how all those parts connected together. And then just finally, just to touch on the lack of prioritisation. And I think this was to do with confidence. Again, staff that were confident really could take one or two issues from the data delving they'd done and said, this is what I'm going to take forward this year and this is what I'm going to improve. Whereas staff with not as much confidence often approach trying to do everything all in the same year. And didn't also have any method of making sure their changes that they were implementing were working. And so considering this led us on to these issues and also the good practice that we'd experienced. We were really keen that we could bring staff together in a supportive environment where they could develop each other and learn from each other's skills, and that we could help them see the student experience data from different perspectives, from different stakeholders within the university. So in response to this, we came up with the University of Magic Enterprise. So this 2-hour workshop was designed to meet the challenges identified in the last slide and help staff write usable action plans. The session was front-loaded with information about writing deliverable actions, prioritizing actions, using data to enhance the student experience, and also about how you go about asking questions of the data. The remainder of the session, we got staff and participants to work on a set of scenarios, which I'll come to in a moment. The fictional university replicated our own university's results and reporting tools. This had a number of benefits as it enabled participants to delve into the reports and develop skills without being distracted by their own course data. It gave them an opportunity to collaborate with their colleagues and where they could analyse the data as a group rather than in isolation. It also allowed them to learn how to do simple things like navigate the reports and which reports to go to for the best insights into the questions we'd asked them to respond to. One of the other things that we noticed as well was that staff often use the quantitative and qualitative data from each session separately from the National Student Survey separately, and we wanted to encourage them to bring those two sources of information together, especially when the student comments have such a rich source of information about that can really expand on what's happening in the quantitative element of the survey. So we produced a version of the student comments report that we use across the university already to use in the workshop along with the quantitative element. So we've been developing these reports at Hallam for a number of years now, and they allow staff to quickly delve into the comments and filter the results by course or even by the themes of the survey itself. So the majority of the session though, we placed participants in groups, and each group had access to a computer with all the data of the University of Magic Enterprise on it. Each group was given a different scenario to work on. Each scenario was written from a different staff perspective, such as university senior management team or a course leader. Each scenario outlined an activity and had a list of questions for the group to respond to. At the end of the workshop, we also asked them to spend 3 minutes going through what they'd found and the experience of the scenarios. Staff that attended the workshops really enjoyed the opportunity of delving into the data without having to justify their own results. They enjoyed the group experience and working with colleagues. They said they understood what they could do with the reports more fully to support enhancement, and they particularly enjoyed approaching the data from different staff perspectives, as this really helped them understand the various changes that were happening in their departments at that time. Both these case studies were based on helping staff delve into their data from a positive perspective. I would encourage you all to think about how you might integrate those principles into your own work or institution. So, kind of what does this mean next, I suppose, for us as we reflect on our work going forward? I think one of the things that really strikes me is that many universities at the moment are creating data strategies about how they might respond to this kind of increasing data world we live in. And also many institutions are investing significant amounts of money in things like learner analytics. But my question would be is what strategies are they putting in place to enable to use that data in an ethical and helpful way? So how are we supporting staff to use our learner analytic tools? Also, what I've not mentioned in this webinar until now is the role of students in our data. Our data is often generated by our students, and so they have some ownership over that data. And I think that comes back to Dr. Liz Austin, who's with me today, she did the first webinar session around the student voice and ethics. And I think there's some serious considerations there about the ethics of what we do when we're data delving that we haven't really gone into today. And finally, the value for money debate, sorry, not finally, but the next point, sorry, the value for money debate is not going away, and that debate will continue to be driven, data-driven and metrics-driven. And universities and higher education sectors across the world are going to have to continue to show their value for money and the impacts they're having on their students and potentially the wider community around them. Also, as many of you know, the UK is going to go through a significant social and economic changes in the next few years. And what impact is that going to have on the university environment that we work in? And finally, and again, I think this reflects some of the issues that Liz raised in her webinar, is what are we asking staff to do when we ask them to delve into their data? Are they being evaluators? Are they being researchers? Or do we just want them to report on those findings? And I think that understanding what we're asking staff to do, and I think I mentioned that point earlier on, is if staff understand what our feedback processes are and they buy into that and they understand what their role is in that process, then it will be a lot more, it'll have a lot more impact on the student experience in the long run. So hopefully you've been able to keep up with me and I've not talked too fast, but I've just got time for questions, I think, on there. So I think we've got about 5 minutes. Is that right, Liz? Yeah. So I'm going to try and look at the text box. If anyone's struggling, I have come up with 2 questions that you might want to respond to or reflect on as well. Well, thank you for your nice comments. It's very nice. So unless we've got any dying questions that anybody wants answering. No. Okay, so I think I'll just take us on to the last slide then, so I don't think there's anything particularly coming through. So I think it'd be really good for us if we could keep the conversation going. So obviously you can find me on Twitter. I've done a hashtag that I will use at some point today. It'd be good if we could carry on that conversation. Also, I'd encourage you to go to our STEER blog, where you can find lots of information about the work we're doing. The work of the Directorate is really diverse. We're involved in lots of different things. So I'd really encourage you to go and check that out. But thank you very much for your time and for coming and participating. Thank you.